Settle in and let your breathing slow, because you are already sinking. Not in a dramatic way, just in that quiet, inevitable way the ocean does everything. Outside your little submersible, the water thickens into black velvet, cold and patient, pressing in from every direction. You might think deep-sea piloting is about bravery or adventure, but mostly it is checklists, soft lights, and staying gentle with the controls while the planet leans on the hull. Tonight, with the Sleepless Scientist murmuring in your ear, you will drift down to hydrothermal vents, where smoke is minerals, warmth is suspicious, and life learns to eat chemistry in the dark. You are leaving the last honest light behind you, and it is not a gradual goodbye. Sunlight does not fade like a dimmer switch down here. It collapses quickly, the way optimism collapses when you read the fine print. At first, the water outside your viewports is a dark blue, then a bruised blue, then something closer to ink. The ocean is layered, and you are passing through its moods one by one. Warm surface water gives up to cooler water. Cooler water gives up to cold water. And the cold water just keeps going, as if it has nowhere else to be. You watch your depth readout creep upward, and if you are paying attention, you notice something else. The feeling of motion is almost absent. In a submersible, descent is not a roller coaster. It is an elevator with better manners. The ballast changes, your buoyancy shifts, and gravity does the rest quietly. Above you, the surface becomes a rumor. Below you, the deep is not empty. It is simply patient. Most of the ocean lives in permanent night, and you are joining it, like a guest who arrived late and forgot to knock. There is a practical reason the ocean feels so calm. Water is heavy, yes, but it is also stubborn. It resists fast change. Temperature shifts happen slowly. Currents move, but they do not hurry. Down here, energy is expensive, and everything behaves like it is paying its own electric bill. You aim your lights forward, then you stop yourself. Not because you cannot, but because you are learning the first rule of deep-sea piloting. Light is not free. Every bright beam is power. Every watt spent is a tiny nibble taken out of your return trip. So you keep the cabin lights low and soft, the kind of glow that makes the gauges readable without turning your face into a reflection in the glass. Your instruments are the real scenery anyway. Depth, temperature, power draw, oxygen. The ocean may be romantic, but your life depends on numbers that change slowly. Outside, something drifts past, just at the edge of what your eyes can catch. A pale thread, a soft speck. It is not a fish, it is not a monster. It is likely a bit of marine snow. And yes, it is as unglamorous as it sounds. Marine snow is the deep ocean's steady weather. Flakes of dead plankton, tiny shells, fecal pellets, shredded algae, and whatever else the surface world drops when it is done being alive. It falls and falls, a slow-motion blizzard feeding the darkness. If you ever needed proof that ecosystems run on leftovers, congratulations. You are watching it snow. The deeper you go, the quieter the world becomes in one sense and louder in another. Sound travels extremely well in water, better than in air. Down here, if something makes noise, it can carry for miles, arriving late and strange, like a message you did not ask for. You hear little things first, the steady hum of your own systems, fans, pumps, the soft shiver of machinery keeping you warm and breathing. Then faint clicks, not from your sub, but from outside. Somewhere in the dark, an animal is using sound the way you use sight. Echolocation is not magic, it is just timing and patience. A click goes out, bounces off something solid, and returns. In air, sound loses energy quickly. In water, sound keeps its strength, and it keeps its secrets, until it decides to share them. So, the deep sea is not silent. It is more like a library, where the books occasionally whisper at each other. You sink through layers that oceanographers like to name, because humans love labeling things they cannot control. The sunlit layer is the epipelagic, which is a beautiful word for the part of the ocean that pretends it is friendly. Below that is the twilight zone, the mesopelagic, where some light remains, but not enough to matter. By the time you reach the midnight zone, the bathypelagic sunlight is gone completely. Not dim, not faint, gone. And it stays gone for most of the planet's habitable space. You might think the deepest sea is a tiny niche, a rare extreme. Wrong. The deep ocean is the default. If Earth had a personality, it would not be a sunny beach. It would be a cold, black plain under miles of water, with a few scattered oases of chemistry. The submersible feels like a warm pocket carved out of that reality. Inside, your breath is normal. Your hands move easily. Your voice, if you speak, is not stolen by pressure. It is easy to forget what is outside, because the hull is doing its job, holding back a world that would gladly compress you into a biology lesson. The descent continues, and you start to notice time stretching, not in a science fiction way, in a psychological way, with fewer visual cues, fewer landmarks, fewer changes. Your brain stops counting moments like coins. It starts letting them flow together, and the ocean encourages that. Down here, even the animals move like they have nowhere urgent to be. When food arrives as a slow snowfall, sprinting is a bad strategy. Better to drift, to wait, to conserve. You are learning the deep sea's main religion, metabolism. A faint shimmer crosses the darkness far ahead, like a tiny camera flash. Then another, lower, and to the left. Bioluminescence, living light. A chemical reaction that turns energy into photons, usually blue-green because blue travels farthest in seawater. Some animals glow to attract prey. Some glow to find mates. Some glow to confuse predators. Some glow because evolution is an indifferent engineer, and it works well enough. Out here, a brief light is not a decoration. It is a sentence. It says, "I am here." It says, "Come closer." It says, "Stay away." It says, "I am already being eaten." You do not chase the lights. You let them happen. Piloting down here is not hunting. It is not disturbing. A sudden thrust can kick up silt. A careless turn can spin you. A strong light can send animals fleeing into the dark, taking the entire scene with them. So you keep things gentle. Your hands rest on controls designed for slow corrections. Tiny bursts from thrusters, a careful trim of ballast. Your movements are small because the environment is unforgiving. The ocean does not need drama to kill you. It prefers paperwork. And now, the darkness outside is so complete that your brain starts making silly guesses. It imagines distance that is not there. It imagines shapes. It imagines eyes. This is what humans do when we cannot see. We create predators out of shadows, even when the shadow is just the inside of our own skull. But the deep sea does not care about your imagination. It cares about pressure, temperature, and chemistry. It is an accounting system, and you are a fragile line item. As you descend further, the water temperature drops toward the deep ocean's steady baseline, just above freezing. Not a biting cold like winter wind, more like a constant smooth drain of heat, the kind of cold that does not hurt right away, it just makes everything feel slower. The sub's heaters compensate. The cabin remains comfortable. And that contrast, that small, warm room surrounded by lethal cold, is the first true intimacy you have with this place. You and the machine, together, pretending you belong. At last, after a long, quiet fall, the seafloor begins to exist. Not as a clear image, not yet, but as a subtle change in the water. More particles, more density in what your lights catch. The ocean's snow becomes thicker near the bottom because it has been falling for a very long time. And then your forward lights touch something solid in the distance, a faint suggestion of terrain, a low ridge, a slope, the deep sea floor rising up toward you like a shoreline made of night. You reduce your descent rate, you check your altitude. You do not want to kiss the bottom by accident. Down here, one careless puff of thruster wash can turn the world into a brown fog that lasts for hours. Silt is patient too. As the seabed comes into view, it looks ordinary in an alien way. Sediment, scattered rocks, the occasional pale starfish sprawled like a dropped ornament. Tracks in the mud that look like someone dragged a finger through pudding. It is easy to forget the scale. This landscape is vast, but your lights make it feel like a small stage. A circular patch of visibility surrounded by infinite black. It makes you feel like the center of the world, which is adorable given the circumstances. You hover a careful distance above the bottom, and you let the scene settle. The deep sea rewards stillness. The longer you wait, the more it reveals. A slow-moving crab, a translucent fish that seems more like a thought than an animal, a brittle star curling its arms like it is stretching in its sleep. And somewhere out there, deeper into the valley, is what you came for, the vents. But before you drift toward that wrong warmth, you need to respect the ocean's real weapon. Not teeth, not tentacles, not monsters, just pressure. Pressure is not a punch. It is not even a squeeze you notice right away. It is a full body, all directions insistence. It is the ocean placing its hand on every square inch of your hull and steadily, politely increasing the weight. At the surface, you live at 1 atmosphere of pressure, which is just a fancy way of saying you are used to the air pushing on you, and you do not notice because your insides push back. Down here, the pressure climbs fast with depth. Every few tens of feet adds another atmosphere. By the time you are in the deep, the ocean is pressing with the kind of force that turns weak engineering into a historical footnote. If you could feel that pressure directly, it would not be pain. It would be instant and absolute failure. But the hull feels it, the seals feel it, The tiny imperfections feel it, so you listen, not to the ocean, to your sub. There is a subtle creak sometimes, a small settling noise. Metal does not usually sound alive, but under constant stress, it develops a voice. It complains softly. It adjusts. It holds. And you, the pilot, are not here to wrestle the sea. You are here to notice small changes before they become big changes. Your day is a loop of calm checks. Cabin pressure steady, oxygen partial pressure within limits, carbon dioxide scrubbers functioning, battery voltage stable, thrusters responsive, ballast status, communications, lights, temperature, then again and again. It sounds boring because it is, and boredom is a survival strategy. Panic makes you move fast. Fast makes mistakes. Mistakes down here have an elegance to them, a suddenness. There is a reason deep-sea vehicles are built around spheres. A sphere is fair. It does not give pressure a corner to exploit. Flat surfaces bend, edges concentrate stress. But a sphere shares the load, spreading the ocean's impatience evenly. So you sit inside a thick-walled pressure sphere, like a pearl that never asked to be made. Acrylic viewports, if you have them, are not just windows. They are carefully engineered compromises, transparent enough to see, strong enough to not become a fatal suggestion. Each viewport is a handshake with physics, and physics has a firm grip. In the old days, people romanticized exploration as a battle against nature. Plant a flag, conquer the unknown. The deep sea does not care for that language. You are not conquering anything. You are being permitted, temporarily, to exist inside a small bubble of normal conditions, and the permission can be revoked. Tiny gaps matter. A hairline crack matters. A seal that was installed slightly wrong matters, because pressure does not need a big opening. It only needs a path. It will take the smallest weakness and worry it like an animal with a bone. A leak at depth is not like a leak in your sink. The ocean does not politely drip. It jets. Water forced through a tiny hole at high pressure becomes a cutting tool. It can slice materials. It can ruin electronics. It can turn a minor problem into an emergency in moments. Congratulations, you have discovered why checklists are beautiful. But you are not here to fear. You are here to understand, and understanding, when delivered gently, is oddly comforting. Because the deep sea's rules are consistent. Harsh, yes, but consistent. Pressure increases with depth because water has weight. Gravity pulls it down. The deeper you are, the more water is stacked above you, and the more it presses. It is not personal. It is just accounting. And because it is consistent, you can engineer around it. Thick hulls, strong materials, redundant systems, careful design, slow operations. That is the human trick. You cannot stop the ocean from being the ocean, but you can build a small argument against it out of metal and math. You drift forward again, following terrain that slopes toward a vent field. Your sonar paints a quiet map in your mind. Not pictures exactly, more like shapes and distances. A ridge here, a depression there, a few tall structures that might be chimneys or might be rocks. Your sub is stable. But you still feel the deep in little ways. Your ears might notice slight changes if the cabin pressure adjusts. Your body notices the steady hum of life support. Your eyes notice that everything beyond your lights is simply erased. There is a certain psychological pressure too, the kind that comes from knowing you cannot just open a door. You cannot step outside for a walk. You cannot breathe the environment. You are sealed in, committed. But again, it is not dramatic. It is routine. The deep sea is a place where drama is mostly a story you tell later, in better lighting. You make another set of checks because the ocean will be here all night, and you might as well be thorough. The oxygen gauge is steady. The scrubbers are doing their quiet work, pulling carbon dioxide from the air so it does not build up and make your thoughts dull and your breathing heavy. Carbon dioxide is a sly problem in enclosed spaces. You do not notice it right away. You just start to feel tired, foggy, a little wrong. It is not the kind of villain that kicks down the door. It is the kind that slowly turns down the brightness of your brain. So you monitor it. You keep your little world balanced. Speaking of balance, the deep also demands careful warmth, because down here, cold is not a weather event. It is the default setting. The water outside stays near freezing, not because the ocean is malicious, but because sunlight cannot reach this far, and because deep water circulates in a global pattern that often begins in polar regions. Cold, dense water sinks near the poles and spreads through the deep ocean like a slow, creeping tide. So, the deep is chilled by Earth's own breathing. And yet, somewhere ahead, hidden in the terrain, is warmth. Not surface warmth, not sunlight warmth. Geological warmth, the kind that comes from the planet's interior, seeping through cracks like a secret the crust cannot keep. Hydrothermal vents are why you came. But you do not rush toward them. You approach vents the way you approach a sleeping animal with sharp teeth. Slowly, respectfully, from an angle that lets you retreat. Because vents are a contradiction. They are warmth in the cold. Chemistry in a place starved of food. They are also unstable ground-shifting rock and plumes that can blind your instruments and coat your sensors in minerals. Your lights catch a change in the water first, a shimmer like heat haze above asphalt, except you are underwater and there is no sun. The plume distorts the view as hot fluid mixes with cold seawater, changing density and refracting light. It looks like smoke, which is a trick of language. Nothing is burning down here. There is no fire, because fire needs oxygen in a way that makes it difficult underwater. What you are seeing is mineral-rich fluid precipitating into tiny particles as it cools. It is chemistry turning into a cloud. A black smoker vent earns its name honestly. The fluid can be extremely hot when it emerges, hot enough to feel impossible in the middle of near-freezing water. But the ocean is excellent at stealing heat. The plume cools rapidly, and minerals come out of solution, forming dark particles that billow upward like a slow underwater storm. You keep your distance. Your sub is not made to be steamed like a dumpling. The seafloor here looks different, less like soft sediment, more like broken rock and rough textures. Vents often form along mid-ocean ridges, places where tectonic plates pull apart and new crust forms. Cracks let seawater seep down into the hot rock below. The water heats, reacts with minerals, picks up dissolved metals and chemicals, and then rises back up, buoyant, returning to the ocean like an exhale. It is a loop. Ocean water becomes something else, briefly, then returns. The vent fluid carries hydrogen sulfide, methane, iron, and other substances that sound like a list of things you should not drink. The smell, if you could smell it, would be rotten eggs and hot metal, but you cannot smell it. You are sealed inside your polite, filtered bubble. Outside, the plume rises and spreads, and the minerals begin to settle, building structures over time. Chimneys, spires, towers made of precipitated sulfides and other compounds. They grow like underwater stalagmites, but faster, because chemistry is enthusiastic when given the right conditions. Some vent chimneys are fragile, some are solid, some crack and collapse, only to be rebuilt again by the constant flow. The vent field is not a static monument. It is a construction site with no supervisor. You drift closer, slow enough that your thrusters do not stir up the bottom. A little too much disturbance and the world turns into a snow globe of sediment, and you lose visibility. The deep sea does not punish you loudly. It just takes away your ability to see and lets you deal with the consequences. Your lights now reveal the edges of a chimney, dark, rough, and irregular. It looks like burned rock. It is not burned. It is built, layer by layer, mineral by mineral, and then you see movement. At first, it is subtle, pale tubes swaying gently, like a field of reeds in a current. Then, thicker forms, clusters, a whole community gathered around the vent, as if it is the only warm lamp in a frozen room. Because in a sense, it is. You might think life needs sunlight as a starting point, that the ocean's food chain begins with photosynthesis, plants and algae turning light into sugar. And most of the time, you would be right. But here, sunlight is irrelevant. Here, the base of the ecosystem is chemosynthesis, microbes using chemical energy, often from hydrogen sulfide, to build organic molecules. They do not harvest photons, they harvest reactions. It is life doing accounting again, just with different inputs. And this is the part that feels like a bedtime story told by a slightly tired planet. Because around these vents, life is not sparse. It can be crowded. Dense patches of animals in an otherwise quiet deep sea, all because the seafloor is leaking chemical energy, like a broken battery. Tube worms stand out first. Giant ones, in some places, with red plumes. They look like something that should not exist, like a prop from an old science fiction set that someone forgot to remove. They have no mouths, no guts, no normal digestive system, which is ambitious. Instead, they host bacteria inside a special organ. The bacteria do the chemosynthesis, turning vent chemicals into food, and the worm provides housing and access to the chemicals. It is symbiosis, which is a kind word for a business arrangement that is old enough to be considered natural. The worm's red plume is not a flower. It is a gas exchange structure rich with hemoglobin, grabbing oxygen from seawater and delivering it to the bacteria, along with sulfide. It is like carrying groceries to your roommate who pays rent by cooking. Other animals crowd in too. Clams, mussels, shrimp, crabs, some with reduced eyes, some with none, some with sensory hairs and antennae that do the seeing for them. In the deep, vision is optional. Sensing is mandatory. You hover at a respectful distance and you let the scene unfold in your lights. The animals do not rush. They live in gradients, too far from the vent, and there is not enough chemical fuel. Too close, and the heat and toxicity can be too much. So they gather in the sweet spot, that narrow band where life can cash in without getting cooked. It is an oasis, but not a gentle one. You think of deserts on land, where water is scarce and organisms cling to rare springs. This is the inverted version. Water is endless. Food is scarce, and the spring is not water, it is energy. A shrimp drifts into view, pale and glossy. It pauses in your beam, then angles away. Your lights are not neutral. They are a disturbance, a bright artificial sun that means nothing here except danger. So you dim slightly and you watch more patiently. Some vent shrimp have specialized structures that help them sense heat. They need to find the right temperature range because a few feet can be the difference between comfortable warmth and lethal fluid. Their world is a thermal map. You can almost feel it through the hull, that weird mixing of extremes. Near freezing water brushing past superheated vent fluid, creating turbulence and shimmering distortion. It is like standing near a radiator in a cold room, except the radiator is loaded with metals and acid. And of course, there is something worse than the heat. Instability. The ground around vents can be fractured. Crust here is young, cracked, and changing. Chimneys can collapse. Plumes can shift. A calm hover can become a careful retreat if the terrain starts to shed rocks or the vent flow changes. But for now, it holds. For now, the vent field is busy and steady, like a factory that never clocks out. And you, the pilot, are mostly doing what you always do, watching your distance, checking your power, making small corrections, letting the sub hang in the water column like a thought held gently in place. Your robotic arms are folded for the moment, resting like patient tools. When you do move them, you move slowly. The deep sea does not like sudden gestures. The arm's motors whine softly, and the joints obey with deliberate precision. If you collect a sample, it is not a dramatic scoop. It is a careful pinch, a small tube, a container sealed and labeled. The deep sea rewards the boring work, the kind done by people who can stay calm while surrounded by a literal tonnage of consequences. And this is where you begin to understand the quiet insult in the title you were given tonight. Why you would not last a day, not because you would scream, not because you would faint, not because a giant squid would wrap you up like a gift. You would not last. Because you would get tired of being careful. The ocean does not need you to be heroic. It needs you to be consistent. It needs you to do the same simple things over and over, without cutting corners, without rushing, without letting your mind wander too far. And of course, your mind wanders anyway, because as you watch this vent community, you cannot help noticing the strange comfort of it. In a place defined by cold, darkness, and pressure, life has found a way to build a city around poison and heat. Not because life is noble. Life is hungry. Chemosynthetic microbes are not performing a miracle. They are exploiting a gradient. They are taking advantage of an energy source and turning it into biomass, and everything else is eating that biomass. or eating something that ate it, in a chain as old as appetite, but it still looks like perseverance from inside your small, warm sphere. The vent plume continues to rise, and in your lights, it looks like a slow underwater storm cloud, constantly forming and dissolving. Minerals precipitate, drift, settle. Chimneys grow, crack, rebuild. Animals cluster, disperse, return. Nothing here is permanent. It is simply stable for now. And that thought, that the seabed itself is a work in progress, is the gentle pressure behind everything you are seeing. Because vents often sit on tectonic boundaries, places where plates spread apart, and magma comes close to the surface, the seafloor is not a floor in the way you want it to be. It is a moving belt, creating new crust, pushing old crust away. The vent field you are hovering over is not ancient. It is part of Earth's ongoing construction. And as you hang there, with your lights carving out a small circle of visibility, you begin to feel the larger mechanism behind the scene. A planet that leaks heat, an ocean that carries it away, chemistry that builds towers, microbes that turn poison into food. A quiet machine, always running. And as you linger, just long enough for the vent field to start feeling familiar, you notice something else in the water. A faint trembling in your instruments, a small change in the way particles drift. Not a quake, not necessarily. Just a reminder that the seafloor is not as solid as your instincts want it to be, and that down here, even still, is only temporary. The tremble passes through your frame the way a rumor passes through a quiet town. Not loud, not even certain, but hard to ignore once you noticed it. Your instruments do not shout. They just drift a little. The heading wanders by a fraction. The altitude meter flickers as the bottom shifts a breath closer, then farther away. You are not being attacked. You are being reminded. The crust beneath you is thin here, by planetary standards. It is young oceanic rock, cracked like cooling bread, still warm underneath. The vent field is basically Earth sweating through a wound it never quite seals. You think the seafloor is a stage, a stable place for the actors to perform. Wrong. It is a slow conveyor belt. It inches apart at ridges, it dives back down at trenches, and it never signs a contract promising to stay put. So you hover like someone trying to hold position above a treadmill. And you do it with restraint, because even your restraint has consequences. A small thruster tap keeps you steady, but it also pushes water. That water kicks up dust. That dust becomes a brown fog that clings to everything. And down here, where your lights only reach a short distance, a fog is not ambiance. It is blindness. You learn to pilot with the gentleness of a person carrying soup in the dark. The bottom is not just mud either. Around vents, it is often a mess of broken basalt, glassy fragments, and mineral crusts that look like someone spilled plaster and let it harden in place. You see cracks that are not dramatic, just thin black lines running through rock-like veins. Those cracks matter. They are the plumbing. Seawater seeps down through fractures, gets heated by hot rock and magma nearby, then rises again. Along the way, it reacts with the crust, trading atoms like bored people swapping seats. Metals dissolve, sulfur compounds form. The fluid comes back up loaded with chemicals, and when it hits cold seawater, the chemicals can no longer stay dissolved. So the ocean makes stone out of smoke and builds chimneys, one mineral layer at a time. It is easy to forget how violent that chemistry is because it looks so calm in slow motion. The plume billows like ink in water. The particles drift. The animals sway. But the vent fluid can be hot enough to cook tissue instantly and acidic enough to chew through weak material. Congratulations! The warmest place in this ocean is also a chemical burn. You keep your distance from the black smoker. You aim your lights across the scene instead of straight into the plume. If you point directly at the vent, the swirling particles scatter your beam and turn your view into a glittering storm. So you work at an angle, like photographing fog with a flashlight. It is not just for aesthetics. It is for navigation. Somewhere to the side, where the fluid is cooler and clearer, you see different vents, pale, shimmering flows, sometimes called white smokers. The name is a little dishonest. It suggests purity. It is not pure. It is just loaded with different minerals, lighter colors, different chemistry. Temperature matters. Flow rate matters. And the biology follows those details with obsessive loyalty. You watch tube worms packed together in dense clumps, their white tubes like bundled cables. Their red plumes bloom and retract with the current, not because they are shy, but because they are regulating gas exchange. They are doing what you are doing inside your sphere, managing oxygen, managing waste, balancing a delicate atmosphere, except they do it while bathing in toxic sulfide because their bacterial partners need sulfide the way you need carbohydrates. You drift a little closer to a cluster, careful not to blast them with thruster wash. Their plumes are soft, but they are not fragile in the way you want them to be. They are used to turbulence, to sudden shifts, to chemical spikes. Your sub is the weird part of this ecosystem. A crab patrols the edge of the colony with slow, deliberate steps, like a security guard who has seen too much and is paid in scraps. It picks at the rock, tastes something invisible, then moves on. The vent field is a buffet, but the menu is mostly microbial film and detritus. Big dramatic bites are rare. Down here, much of eating is grazing. You might expect predators, and they exist, yes, but even predation can look lazy at these depths. A fish hangs motionless in the water, saving energy, waiting for something smaller to make a mistake. A shrimp flicks away and vanishes into shadow. A worm retracts when the current changes, then returns. Everything is economical, and while you watch this careful city, the ground gives you another small hint, a faint, low shudder, like a truck passing far away in a different world. This is what tectonics looks like up close. Not mountains rising in a day, not continents cracking with a scream. Mostly a subtle rearranging, a slow release of stress, a minor slip along a fault. Your sub feels it as a vibration through the frame. Your stomach does not lurch. Your lights do not swing. The ocean is too dense for that kind of drama. It absorbs motion, smooths it, muffles it, but the vent field knows. A little puff of darker fluid surges from a crack. A plume changes shape. A dusting of particles lifts off the rock and drifts upward, like someone shook a rug in slow motion. That is the unnerving part. The environment does not need to do much to remind you it can change without consulting you. The seafloor here is young, formed at the ridge where plates pull apart. New crust is created by lava that erupts, cools rapidly in seawater, and makes basalt. Basalt is dense and dark, and it can form rounded shapes called pillow lavas, as if the ocean is stacking heavy cushions. Over time, the pillows crack. Water seeps in. Heat rises up. Chemical exchange begins again. The vent system is Earth running a heat pump. Cold water goes down, hot water comes up, and the seafloor does the plumbing with whatever cracks it has available. And the cracks are always changing. Sometimes vents shut off. Chimneys die. The flow stops, the minerals stop precipitating, and the structure cools into a dark husk. In the absence of that chemical energy, the dense community thins out. The worms fade. The clams move or die. The shrimp disperse. The city becomes a ghost town, not because anything tragic happened, but because the power plant stopped paying. Then, somewhere nearby, a new crack opens. A new vent starts. Warm fluid rises. Microbes colonize within days to weeks, forming a film. Larvae drifting in the water finally find a place to settle. Over months to years, the neighborhood grows back. It is demolition and redevelopment, run by geology instead of money, which is a comforting thought until you remember geology has no reason to be fair. A big eruption can pave the whole area in fresh lava. It sounds dramatic. Underwater, it can be quiet in the moment and absolute. In effect, a vent field can vanish, buried under new rock, erased with no ceremony. The animals do not get a warning. They do not evacuate. They just get replaced. This is the deep sea's version of impermanence. Not poetic, not spiritual, just physical. You adjust your position again, staying a safe distance from a chimney whose base looks undercut. Chimneys can be hollow. They can be brittle. They can collapse without much provocation. You do not want to be under it if gravity finally remembers it. And now that you are hovering, watching the plumes and the slow-moving crowds, your sonar returns a different kind of information. Hard surfaces here, tall spires, uneven ground. A vent field is not flat, and your submersible, despite being the most expensive bubble you have ever been inside, is still just a bubble with limited visibility. So you build a mental map. You mark safe clearings. You mark spots where the terrain rises too sharply. You mark that one chimney that looks like it is thinking about falling. Piloting is not about getting close. It is about keeping options. And while you do this, a quiet fact settles in your mind, like silt after a disturbance. Down here, you are not surrounded by empty ocean. You are surrounded by weight. Miles of water above you, a roof that cannot be punched through, an environment that would crush you instantly if the hull failed. You keep your hands steady anyway, because fear does not improve your motor control. It just makes you stupid faster. So you focus on the mundane, because the mundane is what keeps you alive. Your gauges glow softly. Battery percentage in a simplified display declines in slow, inevitable ticks. Your oxygen supply is comfortable for now, but it has a number attached to it, and the number is not sentimental. You have heaters running because the water outside is trying to steal your warmth. You have scrubbers working because your lungs keep producing CO2, no matter how calm you are. You have lights because the deep does not provide them. You have thrusters because buoyancy is a suggestion, not a guarantee. The submersible is not a vehicle so much as a small world that you must maintain while also using it to do science, which is where the real comedy starts. Because the public imagines deep-sea exploration as a grand reveal, a heroic descent, a breathtaking discovery. The reality is, you hovering carefully over poisonous chimneys, trying not to stir up mud, while you operate a robot arm like you are using salad tongs while wearing winter gloves. The robot arm is mounted outside, controlled by your hand on a joystick. There is delay, not much, but enough to remind you this is not your own limb. The arm moves slowly because fast movement creates momentum, and momentum down here is a debt with interest. You extend the arm toward a rock coated in microbial mat, a pale film, like wet tissue paper draped over stone. It is alive. It is doing chemosynthesis, or eating chemosynthesizers, depending on the exact species. It is the real foundation of this ecosystem. You open the claw gently. You pinch a small sample. It tears away in strands, reluctant, like it knows it will never see its vent again. You place it into a sample box. You close the lid. You label it mentally because even in the abyss, paperwork finds you. If you are lucky, you have a temperature probe on the arm. You can touch the water near the vent flow and watch the readout climb. You do not touch the main jet. You do not need to prove anything. A few inches can be the difference between slightly warm water and water hot enough to ruin seals. The vent's hottest fluid can be well above the boiling point at surface pressure, but it does not boil down here because pressure changes the rules. Boiling is not just about temperature, it is about vapor pressure. At high pressure, water needs more heat before it can form bubbles of steam. So down here, water can be superheated and still liquid, a calm-looking danger, the kind you cannot see until it is on you. Which is why you do not let the arm drift into the flow. You keep the probe to the side, in mixed water where the gradient is gentle. You collect data the way you collect your thoughts at 3 in the morning, carefully and without sudden movements. There is another subtle threat at vent fields, and it is not one people talk about much. It is buoyancy tricks. Hot vent water is less dense than cold seawater, so it rises. That rising flow can create small currents around chimneys. The currents can tug on your sub, not dramatically, but enough to make hovering more complex. You compensate with tiny thruster bursts. Left, right, up, down. A patient dance. And if you mess up, if you push too hard and kick up the bottom, the sediment rises like a curtain. Your lights hit it and reflect back, turning the world into a blank tan wall. Congratulations, you have built your own fog machine at the bottom of the ocean. So you learn to keep your altitude a little higher than your ego wants. You accept that you will not always get the perfect close-up. You accept that your job is not to touch everything. It is to come back. The vent field continues around you, and you notice something oddly domestic about it. Animals cluster around warm spots like people gathering near a heater in an old apartment. Shrimp stack themselves in tight groups where the water is just right. Worms sway together, their red plumes making the scene look almost floral. But then you see the details that ruin the comfort. Some shells are empty, some worms are damaged, some animals are half buried in mineral crust. This is not a peaceful garden. It is a factory floor with casualties. The vent fluid is toxic to most life. Hydrogen sulfide binds to proteins that normally carry oxygen, interfering with respiration. For many animals, it is suffocation in chemical form. The vent specialists survive by cheating. They evolve proteins that tolerate sulfide. They evolve bacteria that use sulfide as fuel. They evolve behaviors that keep them in the narrow band where conditions are survivable. And even then, they die all the time. Life here is abundant, but it is not safe. It is just productive. You drift past a patch of pale, fluffy-looking mat, and you remember that microbes are doing most of the work. Bacteria and archaea, tiny cells with big chemical talents. They form the base of the food web, and they also shape the environment. Some microbes oxidize hydrogen sulfide, combining it with oxygen to release energy. Others use methane. Some use hydrogen gas. Some do anaerobic chemistry in places where oxygen is scarce. The words for these processes are technical, but the idea is simple. Life finds an energy gradient and builds itself around it. Sunlight is just one kind of gradient. The vent provides another. This is why vents caused such a stir when humans first found them. Not because they were pretty, although they are in a grim way, but because they proved ecosystems could exist without sunlight. It rewrote the default story. It suggested that life might exist elsewhere, under ice, in dark oceans, powered by geology instead of stars. And that thought is comforting until you remember what else it implies. If life can exist in harsh places, it will. If life can exploit a chemistry, it will. The universe does not need to be welcoming. It only needs to be possible. You keep hovering. You keep gathering. You keep making quiet notes in your mind. And then, another small vibration. This one is slightly stronger. Not an alarm. Not a crisis. Just enough that you look up at your internal clock and you look at your systems again. Because that is what you do when the planet clears its throat. You are sitting above a tectonic boundary. The ridge is slowly pulling apart and the rocks are adjusting. Small earthquakes are common. Most are too small to matter to you directly, but they can matter to the vent field. A quake can open a new crack. It can close an old one. It can change flow. It can collapse a chimney. It can trigger a small landslide of loose rock. Down here, geology is not background. It is management. You angle your lights toward the base of a chimney you have been watching. You look for changes. You look for fresh rubble. You look for any sign that the structure is shifting. It holds for now, but you do not linger directly beneath it. You move laterally, giving yourself room, keeping your exit path clear. Your sub's tether, if you have one, is managed carefully. Many deep-diving subs are untethered, but remotely operated vehicles often have a cable that can snag if you are careless. A snag down here is not a minor inconvenience. It is time and effort and battery and risk. So you treat every movement like it costs you something, because it does. The vent field fades behind you as you drift toward a quieter patch of seafloor nearby. The rocks here are darker, cooler, and the animal density drops. It is like stepping away from a crowded street into an empty lot, and you notice something else in the emptiness: the sediment. It is everywhere. A fine layer of particles that settles on every surface, slowly constantly. In a calm area, it lies undisturbed, like dust on an unused shelf. A small crab track crosses it, then disappears under a faint sprinkle of new material. A worm trail curls like a signature. A rock has a pale outline where something once rested, then was moved. The deep sea keeps records in mud and then erases them slowly with snow. Marine snow does not stop just because you are at the bottom. It continues falling, a steady drizzle of organic debris from the surface. And midwater, it is the deep sea's main food supply away from vents and seeps. That means most of the seafloor is starved, living on crumbs. The vent fields are exceptions, bright spots of productivity, which makes them biologically important and geologically temporary. You think about that while you hold position. You think about how a community can be built on a feature that might vanish in a year, or a decade, or in the next eruption, and you realize this is not just a vent story. It is an Earth story. The crust is restless, the ocean is heavy, the heat keeps leaking, and life keeps adapting to whatever crack opens next. Your sub's hull creaks again, softly, as if it also has thoughts. Metal under pressure can make small noises as it settles. Most are normal, some are not. You do not assume. You check. You glance at the hull stress indicators, if your vehicle has them. Some subs have strain gauges. Some rely on simpler monitoring, trusting design margins, and routine inspection. Either way, your job is to notice what changes. Because the deep sea does not offer you a second chance in the same way the surface does. You cannot pull over. You cannot step outside. You cannot call a tow truck to your exact location with a cheerful estimate. You are either a functioning bubble or you are a cautionary tale. So you keep things boring. You run through your checklist again. Power draw, life support, communications, navigation, thruster status, ballast, emergency weights, ready if you need an ascent in a hurry. Emergency drop weights are one of the most comforting ideas in deep sea engineering. If things go wrong, you can release heavy ballast and become positively buoyant, rising toward the surface whether you want to or not. It is the submersible equivalent of letting go of your worries. Except your worries are made of steel. You do not use them unless you have to. An emergency ascent has its own risks, but knowing the option exists is a quiet relief. And speaking of options, you begin to appreciate that your real companion down here is not courage and not curiosity. It is routine. Routine is the thing that keeps you from doing something impulsive, like chasing a glowing animal into unknown terrain. Routine is the thing that keeps you from overusing lights because you want a better view. Routine is the thing that keeps you from forgetting that your battery is finite. So you return toward the vent field, not to get closer, but to reposition for one more careful pass. You approach from down current if you can. You do not want the plume drifting into your sensors. The vent fluid carries particles that can coat camera housings and scratch viewports over time. Even the water is abrasive if you give it enough speed and enough grit. You angle the lights low again. You come in like a slow aircraft landing, except the runway is uneven rock, and the penalty for mistakes is not paperwork, it is physics. The vent city comes back into view, and you see new details this time. Small snails clustered on rock faces, tiny white limpets. anemones with translucent bodies, their tentacles waving gently in the mixed water. Some animals here are vent obligates, meaning they rely on vent conditions. Others are opportunists, showing up when there is food and leaving when there is not. You see fish too, a few, hanging on the edge. They are not the stars of the vent story, but they are part of it, picking at smaller animals, feeding on the abundance. You watch a shrimp move into the shimmering water near a vent, then back out, like it is testing the temperature. It probably is. Some vent shrimp have heat sensors that let them find the sweet spot. You watch a worm retract its plume suddenly, perhaps responding to a change in chemistry, or a shadow, or simply the whim of its nervous system. The plume vanishes into the tube with surprising speed, like a curtain pulled closed. You realize the vent field is not just a landscape. It is a constantly shifting chemical map that the animals read with senses you do not have. You are the blind one down here, even with your lights. That is a humbling thought, and the deep sea likes humility. It prefers you small. Your sub hovers near a patch of shimmering water, and you take another careful reading. Temperature rises slightly. Not dangerous, just warmer. You note it, then you notice something else. The way your depth and altitude readings wobble. Not because you are moving, but because the water density changes in the mixed plume. Hot water is less dense. Cold water is denser. The sensors use sound and pressure to estimate distance and depth. And when the water properties change, the measurements can get a little strange. Even your instruments are subject to the vent's chemistry. Nothing is perfectly stable here. You make a mental note to trust your eyes and your navigation together. You do not rely on a single source. You do not rely on a single story. Down here, redundancy is not a luxury. It is a personality trait. And now, after all that vent wonder, after the shimmering plumes and the tube worm city, your attention drifts back to the larger setting. The deep sea is not just vents. Vents are interruptions. Most of the seafloor is cold, dark, and quiet, with life spread thin. The vent field is a bright bruise on a vast black body, which means that if you lose the vent field in the dark, you might not find it again easily. Not because it is impossible, but because your visibility is short and your navigation is an act of careful estimation. So, you mark your position. You log coordinates. You set a return path. You keep your orientation. You are not a visitor strolling through a museum. You are a pilot managing a tiny world of air and power, and you are doing it on a moving planet. The submersible feels warmer now, partly because your body is settled into the work, and partly because the contrast with the outside is constant. The cabin air is dry compared to the ocean. The hum of the systems is steady. The controls feel familiar in your hands. This is when people get careless, not at the start, when fear makes you sharp, not during the exciting moment when novelty makes you attentive. You get careless when the extraordinary becomes normal. So you do the boring thing again. You check everything again. You keep the habit. You look at your battery estimate and you think about the return. You do not have to leave yet, but you respect time. You respect margins. You glance at the CO2 scrubber status because your brain likes oxygen, but it loves not being poisoned. Slowly, you glance at oxygen partial pressure because too little is bad And too much can also be bad in its own way. Inside a closed cabin, even the air is a system you must manage. Oxygen is not just a feeling, it is a number. CO2 is not just exhalation, it is a creeping fog. You might feel safe because you are dry and warm, but your safety is a machine doing constant work. The submersible is a tiny habitat, and you are its most inconvenient resident. You eat oxygen, you produce CO2, you produce heat, you produce water vapor, you shed skin cells and bacteria like a walking ecosystem. Down here, even your presence is contamination, in a sterile sense, not morally, just physically, which is why sampling is careful, which is why vents are treated like precious sites. You are not here to improve them. You are here to observe and to leave as little of yourself behind as possible. You take one more slow pass over a chimney ridge, watching the plume drift upward until it fades into darkness above your lights. You imagine the particles rising, cooling, settling, building new layers on the structure over time. A chimney is not rock in the usual sense. It is a mineral deposit formed from vent fluids. It grows, it cracks, it collapses, it regrows. It is a living geological object in the way a coral reef is living architecture built by countless small events. And then, as if the vent field wants to underline that point, you see a small collapse. Not the whole chimney, not a disaster, just a chunk breaking off a ledge, falling a short distance and shattering into smaller fragments. A puff of darker sediment blooms, then drifts away. The animals nearby barely react. They are used to it. You react, of course. Your body does not care that it is minor. Your body hears falling rock and imagines the rest. So you back off slightly, steady and controlled. You keep your altitude, you keep your distance. You do not need to be close enough to touch. You need to be close enough to see. And as you settle again into a stable hover, you begin shifting your attention away from vents and toward the thing that keeps you alive through all of this, the sub itself. Because vents are fascinating, but the more immediate story is your small sphere of air, your power budget, your routines, and the quiet ways a vehicle becomes a world with rules. A world where every system is connected to every other system, whether you like it or not, and where the ocean is always waiting for you to make one small mistake so it can teach you what pressure really means. So, you treat the sub like a living thing, not in the mystical sense, but in the mechanical one. It has moods, and those moods are called readings. It has organs, and those organs are pumps, fans, scrubbers, heaters, valves. And you are the anxious little brain riding inside, interpreting every twitch. The cabin air feels ordinary, which is the most dangerous feeling you can have. Ordinary makes you forget that your atmosphere is being manufactured in real time. You are not breathing air. You are breathing a managed mixture inside a sealed container in a place that does not negotiate. Oxygen is the celebrity, of course. It gets all the attention like it does not share the stage. But the real nuisance is what you keep making: CO2, water vapor, heat, and a slow dusting of yourself. You can be the calmest pilot in the world, and your lungs still behave like tiny chemical factories. They pull oxygen in, they push CO2 out, and they do it with the stubborn rhythm of metabolism. The ocean outside is patient. Yes, your biology is patient too, which means it will keep consuming your margins while you admire scenery. A deep-sea sub does not have oxygen the way a room has oxygen. It has an oxygen supply and a plan. Maybe tanks? Maybe chemical oxygen generators depending on the system. Always a limit. And then you have carbon dioxide scrubbing the quiet janitorial work that keeps your thoughts from turning syrupy. Many systems use soda lime, a granular chemical bed that binds CO2 as air is pushed through. If you could see it, it would look like a canister of pale pebbles, the least heroic thing imaginable. But this little bed of minerals is the difference between alert and foggy. CO2 is not dramatic when it rises. It does not leap at you. It just makes you feel slightly wrong. A mild headache, heavier breathing, an urge to nap at the least appropriate time. Congratulations, you have invented the worst possible lullaby, chemistry. So, you watch the scrubber indicators and you keep the airflow steady. You listen to the fans, not because they are soothing, but because silence would be suspicious. The deep sea is one of the few places where a working machine should never sound poetic. Heat management is the next quiet obsession. Your body makes heat, your electronics make heat, your batteries make heat. And the ocean? The ocean is a giant cold sink waiting to steal it. The hull conducts heat away. The water outside convects it away. And because water is so good at taking heat, the outside world is basically a refrigerated vacuum cleaner for your comfort. So the sub fights back with heaters and insulation. Not cozy, not luxurious, just enough to keep fingers moving and systems within spec. Batteries do not like cold. Hydraulic fluids do not like cold. Seals do not like cold. And you get clumsy when cold. Clumsy is expensive down here. You glance at the power draw again, because every heater watt is a tiny bite out of your return. It is an odd kind of budgeting, like paying for warmth with distance. And now you remember the most stubborn truth about deep-sea piloting. Everything costs power. Lights, thrusters, cameras, sonar, computers, life support fans, all of it. The battery is your sun. It is the only reason anything works. People imagine the battery as a big, confident reserve. In reality, it is a slow, steady countdown that never stops, even when you are doing nothing. Because doing nothing still involves breathing, heating, and circulating air. Your survival is never idle. So you learn to think in gentle compromises, dimmer lights, slower movements, shorter arm operations, not because you are stingy, because you are mortal. You nudge the controls, and the sub responds with a small, obedient drift. Thrusters are simple in concept. Spin a propeller, push water, move the vehicle. But every push of water is a push of sediment, a push of animals, a push against stability. Down here, you learn to love hovering. Hovering is not glamorous. Hovering is you continuously correcting the universe, a fraction at a time. You are balancing buoyancy, currents, and your own impatience. Buoyancy itself is a careful trick. The sub is designed to be close to neutrally buoyant, meaning it neither sinks nor floats strongly. To adjust, you shift ballast, sometimes with variable ballast tanks, sometimes with pumps moving fluid. The principle is simple If you are heavier than the water you displace, you sink. If you are lighter, you rise. It is Archimedes, ancient and smug, still running the show. But the ocean is not uniform. Temperature changes density. Salinity changes density. Vent plumes change density. So you can be perfectly trimmed in one patch of water, then drift into another and feel the vehicle start to wander. You correct with tiny bursts because you are not driving on a road. You are drifting in a three-dimensional ocean that does not care where you want to be. There is a particular kind of stress that comes from long, quiet piloting. Not fear, more like attention fatigue. Your eyes track instruments. Your mind tracks time. Your hands make tiny movements. And the ocean keeps pressing, silently, like an enormous weight leaning on the walls of your room. It is not a place for dramatic personalities. It is a place for people who can love repetition. You run your checklist again, not because you forgot, but because the act itself is stabilizing. Cabin pressure steady, oxygen steady, CO2 acceptable, temperature stable, battery good, communications good, navigation good, thrusters responding. In an ideal world, that list is boring every time. Boring is the goal. Boring means you get to return with your samples and your body still in the right shape. You glance at the communications system because it is the one reminder that you are not entirely alone. But deep-sea comms are not casual conversation. Radio waves do not travel well through seawater. If you want to send radio, you basically need to be at the surface, which defeats the point. So deep subs often rely on acoustics, sound pulses, slow data, sometimes just pings and status updates. You can talk, but it is not like a phone call. It is more like leaving voicemails for someone who lives inside the water itself. And the water, it distorts sound, bends it, carries it, sometimes reflects it off layers. The ocean has its own acoustics, like a vast cathedral with moving walls. Even your sonar is a kind of conversation with that cathedral. You send out a pulse, and you listen for the echo. The timing tells you distance. The strength tells you texture. And your brain turns it into a mental image. A small hill, a rock outcrop, a chimney. It is not sight, it is inference. And inference is all you get in a place that refuses light. The more you operate here, the more you understand that the sub is not just transportation. It is a miniature ecosystem. If one subsystem fails, it stresses the others. If the heaters draw more power, you shorten the dive. If the scrubbers struggle, you reduce exertion and stay calm. If a thruster is sluggish, you avoid tight terrain. If your lights flicker, you accept less visibility and more sonar. Everything is a trade, and this is where humans tend to break. Not at the big crisis, but at the small compromise. The moment you think, it is probably fine. The moment you skip a step because you want to see something cool. So you make yourself a little boring on purpose. You move slowly. You check twice. You let the vent field exist without needing to possess it. You bring the robotic arm out again because science demands souvenirs. The arm moves like a polite insect, joint by joint, each motion deliberate. You are watching through a camera, which flattens depth, making distance harder to judge. So you approach samples as if you were trying to pick up a coin with chopsticks. You choose a small chunk of chimney material where minerals have built-in layers. This is not just rock, it is a record of chemistry over time. Metal sulfides, iron compounds, sometimes barite, sometimes silica, depending on the vent type. When you chip a piece away, it breaks with a brittle snap and a faint dust cloud blooms. That dust is heavy with metals that, on land, would be worth money. Down here, it is just the seafloor making its own weird architecture. The sample goes into a sealed box because pressure change matters on the way up. Some samples are sensitive, some microbes die when decompressed, some chemical gradients vanish as soon as the environment changes. That is a quiet tragedy of deep-sea research. You go down to witness a world that exists under crushing pressure. Then you bring pieces up into a world that is basically empty by comparison. And the pieces, they react. Gases come out. Cells rupture. Structures collapse. You learn a lot, but you also lose something in translation. So sometimes you run experiments down here. You keep samples at pressure in special containers. You measure chemistry in place. You treat the vent field like a laboratory that happens to be trying to kill you. You glance toward the vents again, and you notice the animal city shifting slightly. A plume changes direction, and shrimp follow the sweet spot like commuters adjusting to traffic. Tube worms sway. A crab climbs higher on a rock as if it knows something you do not. It might be nothing. It might be a tiny change in flow, or chemistry, or temperature. But you file it away anyway because pattern recognition is half your job. You also notice how the vent field is divided into microhabitats, just a few feet apart, and the conditions change dramatically. Hotter, cooler, more sulfide, less sulfide, more oxygen, less oxygen. The animals arrange themselves accordingly. It is zoning laws written in heat and poison. This is why vent ecosystems feel so alien. On the surface, sunlight is spread widely, and gradients are gentle. Down here, energy is concentrated in narrow streams, so life becomes patchy, clustered, and intensely specialized. Many vent animals begin life as larvae drifting in the water, tiny and vulnerable. They can travel far on currents, but they need to find a vent field to settle or they die. Imagine being born into darkness, drifting for days or weeks, and your only chance is to bump into a chemical oasis the size of a neighborhood. It is not a romantic origin story. It is a lottery, and yet it works because nature is very comfortable with waste. The larvae detect chemical cues. They sense temperature. They respond to the presence of microbial mats. When they find the right conditions, they settle and transform, building their adult bodies around the local chemistry. It is another reminder that the ocean is not empty space. It is a medium full of signals. You just do not speak the language. You hover, and the sub's hum becomes your metronome. Fans, pumps, faint electrical whine. The sound is constant enough that you stop noticing it until it changes. A slight pitch shift can mean a motor load changed. A new vibration can mean a pump is working harder. A sudden quiet can mean a fan stopped, which is never good news in a sealed sphere. So you do what experienced pilots do. You listen with half your mind all the time. And while you listen, you keep your eyes on the most boring display of all, the depth and ascent planning. Because the return is not simply rising, it is returning through pressure gradients and through temperature layers and through a changing ocean. The sub can handle it. but only if you respect the process. If you ascend too fast, you can stress systems. You can cause pressure differentials where you do not want them. You can stir up your own ballast management. Most importantly, you can reduce your margin for handling surprises. So the entire dive is shaped by the knowledge that you must leave enough power to climb back into daylight. Your mind drifts, as minds do in quiet places, toward the history of why anyone bothers with this. Hydrothermal vents were only discovered in the late 1970s, which is absurdly recent. For most of human history, the deep sea was a blank space with myths taped over it. Then, technology got curious. Submersibles, deep-towed cameras, sonar mapping, and finally, someone looked in the right place, along a mid-ocean ridge, and saw smoke rising from the seafloor. At first, the idea sounded wrong. Life without sunlight, communities based on sulfide chemistry, giant tube worms with no mouth. It sounded like science fiction, and it embarrassed the old assumptions. But the deep does not care what assumptions you brought. It does not even know you have them. It simply runs its chemistry, and if something can live there, it does. That discovery rewired the way people think about life in the universe, because if Earth can support ecosystems powered by internal heat, then other worlds might too. Icy moons with dark oceans, Europa, Enceladus, places where sunlight never reaches the water, but tidal flexing and geology might provide energy. Of course, if life exists there, it will not be doing it for your inspiration. It will be doing it because gradients are tasty. You angle the sub slightly, making a gentle arc away from the most active smokers. Not because you are finished, but because you want to see the quieter edges. The places where vent influence fades into normal deep sea. The transition is visible in the biology. The dense clusters thin out. The rock becomes less coated with microbial film. You see more of the typical deep-sea residents, sea cucumbers, brittle stars, slow fish that look like they were designed by committee. A sea cucumber drags itself across sediment, leaving a track like a lazy signature. It is eating the mud, essentially extracting organic bits from the marine snow that has accumulated. It is a living filter, processing the planet's leftovers. You watch it for a moment because it is a perfect symbol of deep sea life. Not dramatic, not fast, just persistent. And then, as you drift over this quieter terrain, the seafloor gives you another reminder of motion. A faint tremor, softer this time, almost like your sub settled into a new posture. You pause and you check your instruments again. This is not paranoia. This is professionalism. The ridge environment can produce frequent small quakes as plates pull apart. Most are tiny, but they can trigger small rock falls. You scan ahead with sonar. No new obstacles, no sudden cliffs. Your altitude remains stable, but you notice a thin haze rising from the bottom in one patch. Not a vent plume, more like disturbed sediment slowly lifting and drifting. It could be your own thruster wash, finally catching up, or it could be a small slide. Either way, it is a quiet lesson. Even your presence can rewrite the local visibility for hours. So you pull back and you let the haze drift where it wants. You do not chase it. You do not need to know every detail. The deep sea will still be here, erasing your tracks with patience. Now the routine returns to the foreground again. Like a familiar blanket, you check the time, you check the battery, you check the life support numbers, You also check something people rarely think about: humidity control. Inside a sealed cabin, your breath adds water vapor. Condensation can form on cold surfaces. Electronics do not love moisture, so the sub may have dehumidifiers or simply careful thermal design. The irony is gentle. You are inside a vehicle surrounded by water, and you still worry about water in the wrong place. The same goes for contamination inside. Air filtration matters, not because of germs in the ocean air. There is no ocean air, but because you are shedding particles, oils, and smells into a closed space. In long dives, smells become their own ecosystem. Rubber seals, warm electronics, human breath, sometimes a hint of lubricant. It is not unpleasant exactly. It is just enclosed. It makes you appreciate that the sub is not a cockpit. It is a tiny room you cannot leave. You shift in your seat, feeling the constraint. Even with modern design, space is limited. Your knees might be close to panels. Your shoulders might brush equipment. You keep your movements controlled because you do not want to bump a switch with your elbow. That is not a joke. In a tight space, your body becomes part of the risk management plan, so you move like a careful person in a dark kitchen at night. Slow, aware, hands close, minimal drama. And while you hover, you think about the hull again, not as a symbol, but as a physical object. Steel, titanium, composites, acrylic, depending on the craft. The choice of material is always a compromise between strength, weight, corrosion resistance, and cost. Titanium is wonderful and expensive. Steel is strong and heavy. Composites can be light but complex, and their failure modes can be less forgiving. Acrylic viewports are clear but must be thick and must be inspected obsessively. The ocean does not care what your hull is made of. It cares about whether the hull has a weak point today. So inspection culture becomes religion. Before dives, you check for micro cracks, corrosion, seal wear. You torque bolts to spec. You log maintenance. You track hours and cycles because pressure cycling matters. Every descent is a compression cycle. Every ascent is a decompression cycle. Materials fatigue. Tiny flaws grow. The ocean is not trying to break your vehicle, but it will take advantage if your material science gets lazy. You glance at the external camera feed again. A shrimp passes close, briefly illuminated, then vanishes. It is strange how quickly your brain assigns meaning to these brief appearances. A creature becomes a character. A moment becomes a scene. But down here, it is mostly just traffic. Animals moving through gradients, doing their quiet work. The deeper truth of vent ecosystems is that they are powered by oxidation and reduction reactions. Electrons moving from one molecule to another, releasing energy. Chemosynthetic microbes use that energy to fix carbon, building organic molecules. One common pathway involves hydrogen sulfide being oxidized using oxygen, producing sulfate. To you, that is just chemistry. To microbes, it is breakfast. And then higher organisms either graze those microbes or host them internally. That hosting is why tube worms can be so large. They do not need to collect food particles. They cultivate an internal farm. It is efficient as long as the vent keeps flowing, which brings you back again to the restless ground. Vent fields can be short-lived on geological timescales. Sometimes years, sometimes decades, sometimes longer if conditions remain stable. But the ridge keeps moving. The magma supply changes. Cracks open and close. So, vent animals have evolved a lifestyle built around instability, rapid colonization, high reproduction, larvae that can travel, symbioses that kickstart growth. It is life in a place where the neighborhood might vanish tomorrow. You adjust your position once more, and now you begin to prepare for a different phase of the dive. Not leaving yet, but shifting from vent observation to the broader rhythm of deep-sea signals. Because once you stop staring at the chimneys like they are sacred, you start noticing the ocean's subtler communications. The first is sound. Always. You hear clicks again, faint but crisp, transmitted cleanly through water. Some of it could be biological, like sperm whales hunting far above, or smaller-toothed whales using echolocation. Some could be shrimp snapping, if any are nearby, though vents are not known for snapping shrimp like reefs are. Some could be ice cracking far away, if you are under certain regions. Some could be your own vehicle, echoing its presence. And some of it is the ocean itself. Creaking, groaning, shifting sediment, the low rumble of distant tectonics. The deep sea is a soundscape you cannot see, a conversation in the dark. You also start noticing light, not from your lamps, but from the animals. Bioluminescence is more common in the midwater, but even near the bottom, you may see brief glows. A small flash, then nothing. A faint line of blue, like someone drew with a dying pen. Bioluminescence is a chemical reaction, often involving luciferin and luciferase. The names sound like a fantasy novel, but it is just molecules doing what they do. Energy in, photon out. In the deep sea, glowing is communication and camouflage at the same time. Some animals use counter-illumination, matching the faint downwelling light to erase their silhouette. Down here near vents, there is no downwelling light, so the purpose shifts. A flash can startle a predator, a glow can lure prey, a pattern can attract a mate, a cloud of glowing particles can create a decoy. It is beautiful, but it is not kind. It is warfare with aesthetics. You remember marine snow again, because it never stops. It falls through your lights like slow ash. Each flake is a tiny ecosystem, sometimes carrying bacteria, sometimes carrying bits of life from above. Marine snow aggregates as it sinks. Small particles stick together with mucus and organic polymers, forming larger clumps. Those clumps sink faster, delivering carbon to the deep. This is the biological pump, the process that moves carbon from the surface ocean to the deep sea. It helps regulate climate over long times. It is one of the reasons the ocean is not just scenery. It is a planetary organ. You watch the snowdrift and you realize you are sitting inside the planet's carbon accounting system. Above you, photosynthesis pulls carbon dioxide from air into biomass. Some of that biomass sinks, gets eaten, gets processed, and carbon ends up stored in deep water or sediments. Vents add a different kind of carbon cycle too, bringing chemicals from the crust, feeding microbes, changing local chemistry. Everything connects, even when it feels isolated. And that is another reason you would not last a day here. if you came for romance. The deep sea is not romantic. It is logistical. Your lamps carve a cone through the dark, and outside that cone is a universe of unknown animals that do not care you are there. Your sonar pings softly, and your sub hums, and your battery slowly declines, a quiet metronome counting down your permission. You turn slightly, making your way along the seafloor, following a gentle slope away from the most active vent chimneys. The landscape becomes more uniform again, with patches of sediment and scattered rocks. Every so often, you see a faint track, a line in the mud, a swirl, evidence that something moved through here hours ago or days ago. Then, marine snow fills it in, slowly erasing it. The deep sea does not preserve footprints the way dry deserts do. It preserves them briefly, then smooths them away like a tired housekeeper. You watch a brittle star raise an arm into the water, catching particles drifting by. It is filter feeding, using posture more than motion. Again, economical. You pass a fish that barely seems to acknowledge your lights. Its body is soft, adapted to pressure, with little muscle mass. In the deep, heavy muscle is a luxury unless you have food to fuel it. Many deep-sea fish have slow metabolisms. They can survive on little, waiting long periods between meals. Some have large mouths and expandable stomachs, because when food is rare, you eat what you can when you can. It is not graceful. It is practical. And then a sudden pinprick flash of blue appears off to your right and vanishes. Another appears lower, then nothing. It could be a small crustacean, startled by your approach. It could be a worm releasing glowing mucus. It could be a fish flashing a lure. You do not chase it. You let it exist as a brief punctuation mark in the dark. Your sub continues to drift, and your mind starts connecting the small signals into a larger picture. The ocean is a machine, but not a clean one. It is a messy machine full of life, debris, heat flow, and slow circulation. Down here, deep currents still exist, not fast like surface currents, but persistent. They are driven by differences in temperature and salinity, a process called thermohaline circulation. Warm water moves, cools, becomes denser, sinks, and flows through the deep. This circulation helps distribute heat around the planet. It also distributes oxygen, nutrients, and carbon. Even at the seafloor, you are not in still water. You are in slow-moving water that has traveled for years, sometimes centuries, since it last touched the surface. That is a strange thought, and the deep sea likes strange thoughts. The water outside your hull may have been last at the surface before your grandparents were born, depending on the region. It has been dark for a long time, and yet it still contains oxygen, because the ocean's circulation brings it down. If circulation slowed drastically, the deep could become more anoxic, less habitable for many organisms. So when you see life down here, you are also seeing the result of planetary scale plumbing. You glance toward the vent field in the distance, now faint in your lights. It looks like a small factory district, still exhaling plumes. You can almost imagine it as a town at night, with smokestacks and residents clustered around warmth. But it is not a town. It is chemistry. It is tectonics. It is the planet leaking internal heat left over from formation. Plus, heat generated by radioactive decay in the mantle. Earth is warm inside because it was built through collisions and compression, and because certain isotopes keep decaying, releasing energy. That heat moves outward slowly through convection in the mantle, through conduction in the crust, and through episodic events like volcanism. Hydrothermal vents are one of the ways that heat escapes efficiently. They are like radiators on the seafloor, moving energy from rock to water. And that escaping heat does more than make vent cities. It alters seawater chemistry. It contributes to mineral deposits. It supports microbial life that may resemble early life on Earth. There is a reason people talk about vents and origins, not because vents are proven birthplaces, but because vents provide what early chemistry might need: gradients, mineral surfaces, energy, time. A vent chimney is full of tiny pores and channels. Like a natural reactor, fluids flow through, mixing, reacting, precipitating. Minerals like iron sulfide can catalyze reactions. Organic molecules can form under certain conditions. You do not have to believe in a single origin story to appreciate the appeal. If you are a molecule trying to become more complicated, you want energy and structure. Vents provide both without requiring sunlight. Of course, molecules do not want anything. They just react. But humans like to narrate it anyway. You keep piloting, staying calm, letting these thoughts drift, because thinking about planetary heat is safer than thinking about the miles of water above you. The sub's navigation system marks your track, a thin line of certainty in a place that resists certainty. You follow it loosely, not because you are leaving, but because you are keeping your map coherent. A good pilot always knows how to go back, not perfectly, not instantly, but reliably. You bring your lights down slightly and watch the marine snow again. It is oddly hypnotic, this slow fall through the beam, like driving at night in a light snowfall, except the snow is dead plankton and waste, and the road is a tectonic plate. A small cluster of amphipods flickers into view, tiny shrimp like scavengers. They might be there for the leftovers or for the microbial film. They scatter when your lights sweep over them. You realize, again, that your presence is a disturbance. Your lights, your sound, your thruster wash, even the electromagnetic fields around your systems, all of it is an intrusion. So, deep-sea science often tries to be minimally invasive. Red lights sometimes, because some animals see red poorly. Low-intensity beams, slow movement, but you cannot be invisible. You can only be polite. You check your power again, and you decide to change tasks. Not because of urgency, but because of rhythm. You have gathered samples, observed vents, mapped terrain. Now you spend time simply listening and watching, letting the deep show you what it does when you are not demanding a performance. This is when the ocean feels like a quiet machine, not rushing, always running. You hear a distant series of clicks again, more pattern this time, and you wonder if it is a whale far above. Sound can travel so far in water that you can hear events happening miles away, sometimes tens of miles, depending on conditions. The ocean has sound channels, layers where sound waves bend and get trapped, traveling efficiently. The deep sound channel, sometimes called the SOFAR channel, is one reason whales can communicate across vast distances. You are down near the bottom, but sound still reaches you. It arrives like a letter with no return address. You also hear the faint ping of your own sonar returning. The timing becomes familiar, like a heartbeat. Pulse, wait, echo, pulse, wait, echo. And in between, the background noise of the deep, a low hiss of water movement, occasional creaks, tiny impacts of particles on the hull, your own fans, always. You begin to appreciate that the deep sea is not silent. It is just not interested in speech. As you hover, you catch another faint shimmer in the water, not from a vent this time, but from a subtle temperature boundary. Even away from vents, water masses can have slightly different properties. A thin layer of different density can create optical distortions. You think of it as underwater weather, not storms, but layers. The editor, in your mind, wants to make it dramatic, a mysterious veil, a boundary between worlds. In reality, it is just fluid physics, different density, different refractive index, light bending slightly, but it still looks like a ghost. And the deep loves ghosts. You hold position near the boundary and watch how marine snow behaves. Particles slow, then drift sideways, as if caught in a gentle current. That tells you there is flow here. Subtle, but real. Everything moves, even when it feels still. Your attention returns again to the sub, because it is always there, always relevant. You check the external thrusters temperatures, if available. Motors working in cold water can behave differently. You check the hydraulic pressure for the manipulator arm, because leaks can happen. A hydraulic leak in the deep is not just a mess. It can be a loss of function, and function is how you solve problems. You think about what happens if something goes wrong down here. Not catastrophically, just inconveniently. A stuck thruster, a sensor failure, a camera outage, a manipulator jam. Most deep-sea dives are not saved by heroics. They are saved by redundancy and procedures. If one camera fails, you have another. If one thruster fails, you can compensate with others. If one sensor is unreliable, you cross-check with another. And if you lose too much capability, you leave early, because stubbornness is not a survival trait. You would be surprised how many disasters begin as a person deciding not to be inconvenienced. So you remain flexible. You accept imperfect data. You accept that the deep sea does not owe you a perfect view. And as you continue this slow, careful drift along the bottom, the signals keep arriving. A small flash of light, a distant click, a change in current, a tiny silt puff. The deep sea is not empty. It is just subtle. Somewhere above you, far beyond your lights, the water column stretches upward for thousands of feet. In that column, midwater animals migrate nightly, rising toward the surface to feed, then sinking back down at dawn. It is called DL vertical migration, the largest daily movement of biomass on Earth. Even though you are down here on the bottom, that migration affects the deep. It influences how much organic matter sinks. It influences the distribution of nutrients. It influences who eats whom. So the deep is connected to the surface by a constant rain of food, and by daily commuting life you never see. That thought makes your little vent field feel less isolated. It is not a separate world. It is a neighborhood in the same ocean, connected by currents and falling debris. You shift your heading slightly, and in the distance, your lights catch a faint rise in terrain. Not a chimney, more like a ridge of basalt. You approach slowly because ridges can create blind spots. As you crest the ridge, you see a shallow depression beyond, filled with softer sediment. Tracks crisscross it, a few sea cucumbers, a pale fish resting in the water, barely moving, and in the center, a small patch of shimmering water again, weaker than a vent plume. It might be a diffuse vent, a low-temperature seep, not the dramatic smokers, but a gentle leak of warmer, chemically altered water. Diffuse flow areas are often where many animals prefer to live. The temperatures are milder, the chemistry is still rich enough for microbes. It is the comfortable edge of the danger zone. You hover near it, and you lower a probe. Temperature rises a little, not scalding, not even hot, just wrong enough to notice. You take a chemistry reading if your instruments allow, maybe sulfide, maybe pH. The details depend on your kit, but the principle is the same. You are measuring the invisible. And while you measure, you watch the animals here, smaller and more scattered than at the main smokers. A few snails, some worms, a thin microbial mat. It looks like the vent field's quiet cousin. Less crowded, less intense, still part of the same story. You move on again, leaving the diffuse flow behind, because time and power are always ticking. The deep sea signals continue. You see a bioluminescent spark far off, then nothing. You hear a distant rumble, maybe tectonic, maybe just your imagination finding patterns. You let it be ambiguous. Ambiguity is part of the environment, and as you drift, your mind returns to Earth's inner heat again, because it is the engine behind the vents, behind ridge formation, behind so much of what you are seeing. The mantle convects slowly, like a pot of thick soup that takes millions of years to stir. Hot material rises, cool material sinks. At mid-ocean ridges, mantle material upwells, melts partially, and forms new basaltic crust. That crust spreads away from the ridge at about the speed your fingernails grow, give or take, which is a lovely insult. The planet rearranges continents at fingernail speed, but over millions of years, fingernails build mountains, open oceans, and close them again. Hydrothermal vents are tied to this spreading. New crust is hot and fractured. Water can circulate through it. As crust ages, it cools and thickens, and venting becomes less common. So vents are often young features associated with youthful seafloor. You think about the age of the seafloor beneath you? Maybe a few million years? That sounds old to you. To geology, it is basically newborn. Continental rocks can be billions of years old. Ocean crust rarely survives that long because it is recycled at subduction zones, diving back into the mantle. So the seafloor is constantly renewed. It is a skin that sheds and regrows. Vents are part of that shedding. They are places where the planet exchanges heat and chemicals with the ocean, like a slow breathing through cracks. You keep piloting, you keep the routine, and eventually, without announcing it with drama, your attention drifts toward planning the next phases of the dive. More mapping, more listening, more careful sampling of the quieter deep. Because the vent field is only one chapter of the deep sea, and the ocean is still doing what it does best, continuing patiently while you try to keep your small world of air and power balanced against it.